Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the first week of fall veto session, including the status of the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program and the latest firearms registration numbers. I'll then join the Center Square's executive editor Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you want a front row seat to how Illinois government really works? Do you want to see how laws are made in real time? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, so you can make informed decisions about your community and your future. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com. Blue Room Stream, government transparency at your fingertips.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. With the first few days of fall veto session in the books, Illinois lawmakers have yet to tackle the Invest in Kids program. Kevin Bessler has that story.
The Tax Credit Scholarship Program, which is funded by individuals and companies who receive a tax credit for donating to the program, is set to expire at the end of the year. Families descended on the Capitol in Springfield this week, calling for lawmakers to save the program, including Sophia, a young student from Joliet.
There's going to be more people like us suffering and also being stressed out, trying to make sure what's going to happen in our future.
Nathan Canine, spokesman for the American Federation of Children, says the argument that the program siphons dollars from public education is ludicrous.
I don't see how you can say that that's taking money from anybody, especially because this is funded through a tax credit mechanism and doesn't touch public school budgets at all.
Lawmakers will convene for 3 more days of the fall veto session in November. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Fewer than 0.1% of the state's firearm owners' ID card holders have registered with Illinois State Police semi-automatic firearms that are now banned by state law. Of more than 2.4 million FOID card holders, the total for week 3 of the registry shows just over 2,000 individuals have disclosed more than 3,800 firearms, more than 2,100 accessories, and almost 40 ammunition disclosures. That's 0.08% of FOID card holders, up from 0.07% the prior week. Democratic State Representative Maura Hirschauer, who supports the gun ban and registry, reacted to the low compliance rate 3 weeks in.
Well, with any policy we pass in Illinois, education and public awareness is a critical component of that.
Republican State Representative Blaine Wilhauer isn't surprised by the low turnout.
The folks that own guns in the state of Illinois know that this initiative is unconstitutional, and I've been pretty clear all along that, non-compliance to something that's non-constitutional is an appropriate stance to take.
If the gun ban is not struck down by pending litigation in federal courts, those found not complying with the registry could face criminal penalties. Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me again today, as he does each and every week, is Greg Bishop, the Center Square's Illinois Capitol Bureau senior reporter and editor. How are you today, Greg?
Dan, I thought I'd still be stuck at the Illinois Capitol because this is the first week of fall veto session, but the House canceled today, this Thursday, and the Senate came in for like an hour and a half, and then they decided to go home. So not much veto action on this Thursday.
Well, that actually was what I was going to ask you about, Greg. First, let me let listeners know we are recording this on Thursday, October 26th. This was the first week, really 3 days, and really not even 3 days, a veto session of the Illinois legislative session. It's pretty much a wrap now, as you just said. But I'll be honest with you, Greg, it doesn't feel to me like a lot of stuff got done this week. with 3 more days of veto session left, not for a couple of weeks, though. Greg, update our listeners on what did get done this week and what's still left to do.
Yeah, so typically veto session is specifically put out on the schedule to be a certain time after spring session and after the governor has time to act on legislation that they pass during spring session. So it's an integral part of the overall legislative calendar. And typically, of course, this is now the first year of the second term of Governor J.B. Pritzker. When he was in his first few years, there really wasn't much to deal with in veto session because Democrats were practically in lockstep with the governor. But there were a few things that did come up during spring session that the governor either changed with an amendatory veto or just vetoed outright. And we have the 6 days of veto session to deal with some of those things. And those include changes to the state's moratorium on nuclear power generators, to dealing with high power transmission lines and whether or not certain companies can have right of first refusal, to even dealing with contracting for religious considerations when it comes to school lunch or hospital meals. So these were just some of the things that the governor changed or outright vetoed over the summer. But with veto session being just 6 days scheduled, the final 6 days of the legislative calendar, we anticipated a lot of action within this first week and a lot of action within the last 3 days, which start November 7th, 8th, and then 9th. So when we started this week, we thought, okay, let's see, are they going to advance veto override motions? Are they going to advance totally new legislation to address some of the governor's concerns? And that did happen to a degree. One in particular, the Illinois Senate did pass a modified school lunch hospital meal consideration for religious foods. And that did pass the Senate. Now it's got to go over to the House. But while the legislature's in session, they don't just have to deal with vetoes or amendatory vetoes. They can pass whatever they want. So we have seen other measures that don't deal with vetoes or amendatory vetoes pass during veto session, including a measure that is considered a trailer bill, a follow-up bill, a bill that is meant to clarify language of a law that they enacted over the summer. And that law in particular deals with electric vehicle charging stations in homes. So they did advance a cleanup bill in the Senate. Republicans pushed back against that measure, saying that it's really going to increase the overall cost of housing in Illinois by requiring multifamily units to have EV chargers if they meet certain thresholds. So you can kind of see when you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, this first week of veto session, some more kind of non-controversial things were taken care of to the degree where both the House and Senate were in on Tuesday. Both the House and Senate were in on Wednesday, but the House canceled Thursday. The Senate came in today, Thursday, when we're recording this, and they took up some appointment messages, some points of personal privilege, talked about so-and-so's birthday, and then they went home for the weekend. So now they're off for a week, and it's fully anticipated that when they come back November 7th, Dan, it's going to be pedal to the metal because not only do they have to deal with the nuclear moratorium question, they also have to deal or not deal with the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program. And all week this week, there have been scores of families each and every day, including today, here in Springfield, lobbying their state legislators to expand or extend the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program.
That was one of the key topics that I wanted to talk about, Greg, because the Invest in Kids Scholarship Program, really Illinois' only school choice program. It expires, as you mentioned, at the end of this year. There are, more than 10,000 students who are currently going to the school of their choice because of this program. They'll be left out if the lawmakers do not extend it. What are you hearing? Has anything been filed? What's going on with it?
So the House had a measure filed that would modify the program. It would extend it for 5 years, but it would bring about a tiered structure. So just to kind of give a little bit of background here, the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program is privately funded. No tax dollars go into it. So it's a privately generated fund that was created back in 2017 to allow for school choice. And there's a cap of $100 million that can be donated. And those who donate to the fund can get a 75% Illinois income tax credit. So if they donate $100, they get $75 as a tax credit. So there were, some various other measures in there that, spelled out the granting organizations that could be involved here, had the sunset of December 31st, 2023, had a cap again of $100 million for the total program. And I think you had a cap of $1 million per donor that they could ultimately donate. So the idea, to extend the sunset, some said just leave it as it is and just extend the sunset. Others advocated for lifting the sunset entirely and making it a permanent program. But what we saw filed by the Democrats in the House, which has not been advanced, nor has there been any kind of hearing on the proposal, which signifies it could change over time. But the most recent proposal extends it for 5 years, but changes various thresholds. So there's different income tax credits for how much somebody may donate, and it changes the cap from $1 million to $500,000 for individuals who could donate. So a lot of different tweaks, but interesting that we still have not heard, with now only 3 legislative days left in the calendar year for them to deal with this. It's got a lot of families that I've seen here on the Capitol grounds every day this week raising concerns. I talked with one family, a mom who had twin boys, and she was glowing about the program, saying that her sons were able to take part in all kinds of humanities classes, from arts to dance to music, even traveling the world with their various groups, opportunities they would not have been provided in the public school. Plus, they were able to add to the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program with academic success scholarships because her twin sons are excelling in the private school they go to in Chicago. I talked with another family here in Springfield, a single mom. She has 3 kids, and they all go to the same school. And she says it's integral for her to be able to have all 3 of her children, different ages, go to a private school. Others have shared that they want their children to go to a parochial school, to a school with religious guidance. And that's a choice that they hope to maintain. Even talked with Sophie, who shared with me her story of her father passing away and the pressures on her mother, and how going to this private school has been so helpful. And even to the point where the idea of the program being ended at the end of the year, adding to questions of stress onto the family. So there's a lot of families. I've seen scores and dozens and dozens and dozens of families come through the Capitol. But interesting, even though all week we've seen this, we've heard zero conversation about this in committee hearings, and I've approached several Democrats. One state Senator Robert Martwick wasn't ready to talk about it. Another I talked to as the Senate wrapped up today, they didn't necessarily want to go on camera, but they said that they're not filing anything, and what's been filed is in the House, and they don't have it in the Senate. So there seems to be a willingness to kind of not recognize the significance of what these families are facing if indeed this school choice program, which is privately funded, is ended at the end of the year. So we'll be watching this, and I think it'll be, as one Republican said weeks ago, this will be the fight of veto session to re-up the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program.
One final point on this, Greg, teachers unions across the state, particularly the Chicago Teachers Union, at least they've been the most vocal about it, oppose extending the Invest in Kids school scholarship program. I think the feeling is that it would be they claim that would take away funding from public school systems. But as you mentioned, this is private dollars that's funding this Invest in Kids program. How much influence do these teachers unions, do you think, have on Democratic lawmakers who so far haven't advanced anything?
Yeah, there's obviously differing perspectives on this, something we've been covering at thecentersquare.com, and even Governor J.B. Pritzker having to get into the fray here. Last week, he said that he will sign an extension of the Invest in Kids school choice scholarship program. The school unions, they fired back and tried lumping the governor in with conservative governors who advocate for school choice in other states. Governor Pritzker this week said that, people in the heat of the moment might say things that they don't agree with. And he says that he's able to forgive, seeming to say that he forgives the teachers union for saying that he's a conservative. So the governor then reiterated that, it's up to the legislature as to what they do. Last week, he said he'd sign an extension. This week, he seemed a little bit guarded, saying that he's focused on public school funding. But again, last week, he said he will sign an extension of the Invest in Kids school choice scholarship program. But one thing that's important here, Dan, is while teachers unions say that this takes public tax dollars away from public schools, the advocates for Invest in Kids say that's not true. It's private dollars that go into the fund. And they also point that the public schools have been getting $350 million extra each year for the past 5 years. Again, $350 million. Extra dollars per year. Right now, K through 12 schools in Illinois cost more than $10 billion in state tax dollars, not to consider the local dollars they get from local property taxes. But clearly, public schools are getting more and more money each and every year, while this Invest in Kids school choice scholarship program could be vanishing at the end of the year if legislators don't take advantage of the final 3 days of legislative session this calendar year.
Sounds like lawmakers still have quite a bit of work to do when they return in a couple of weeks in November. I want to move on to another couple of topics here. We've talked about the migrant crisis that the city of Chicago and some suburbs face. I think we're at more than 18,000 non-citizens who've been bused from the southern border to Chicago and surrounding areas over the past year plus. There was a community meeting this week that the Center Square covered over a plan to build essentially a tent city in Brighton Park in Chicago, and a lot of residents showed up showing displeasure for that plan. Tell us about it.
Yeah, and this is something that we typically hear from elected officials if they find something out from the media. Say an alderperson finds something out from the media that the mayor's doing, they get frustrated. Well, it seems that residents were the ones frustrated that they were learning something from the media, and that's the story of Jan Moe, who in Chicago at the Brighton Park area, he lives right next to this lot that all of a sudden he sees a reporter out there and they're doing a stand-up report, and he finds out that indeed this is going to be a location for a migrant base camp tent. And Moe said that he's been in the community as a migrant himself for years, and he's seen the community flourish and be family friendly, but he and others raised their voices at a recent community meeting opposing this idea, saying that it will not make the community more safe. So the idea is, of course, we've got, and Dan, I've heard a number of upwards of 20,000 migrants that have arrived in Chicago in the past 13 months. It just continues to grow. And even the idea of a dozen or so more buses per week coming to Chicago. So clearly there's a resource issue. Clearly there's a humanitarian issue, because a lot of these migrants have been living in police stations on the lobby floors. They've been living at the YMCAs or at O'Hare International Airport, while others have been staying in luxury hotels at the taxpayer expense. And hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on this. But with winter coming, those who may have been in just regular tents on the street, they're not going to be able to stay out on the streets and that capacity, especially with a cold Chicago winter. So Chicago, weeks ago, announced that they will have base camp migrant tents, and in Brighton Park, that's where they're planning one of them. And city officials were on hand, took a lot of questions, a lot of passion from those who are in that neighborhood, and they spelled out how they feel this is going to play out, with city officials saying they're going to start with a couple of hundred migrants to go into this base camp area, mainly composed of families they're going to start with, but ultimately it'll be up to 2,000 that could be at this base camp. It'll be heated, it'll be air conditioned, it'll be having 24-hour unarmed security, they say, but clearly that's not enough to allay some of the concerns that residents in this area and elsewhere throughout Chicago have when it comes to the ongoing non-citizen crisis in the city of Chicago.
I mean, this is pretty much an immediate issue right now with temperatures in northern Illinois, including the Chicago area, expecting to dip into the 20s beginning Sunday night, overnight Sunday into Monday, and those temperatures are going to continue through much of the week, below freezing. They better get their act together, I guess. It's a controversial issue.
This is something as well that has been brought up during veto session with Republicans saying that they see tax increases on the horizon if this isn't dealt with, and they want to see the southern U.S. border closed. They want to see migrants that are here illegally to be deported. They also have filed, as Republicans in the minority party, a measure to do away with the Trust Act, and that is what essentially makes the state of Illinois a sanctuary state, by saying that local law enforcement cannot work with federal immigration enforcement to enforce federal immigration law. So they're trying to repeal that. And Governor Pritzker, even just today, pushed back on that idea and said, well, that's about undocumented migrants, not those here seeking asylum. But the governor assumes that everybody here is seeking asylum, which there's a due process, and you've got X amount of days to have an asylum hearing after coming into the country across the border seeking asylum. So there is some due process there, but are all of those individuals who've come to Chicago truly asylum seekers? That itself is a question that hasn't yet been fully vetted. And we'll see how that plays out. But this issue is something that even leads to the questions of taxpayer cost for healthcare subsidies, something else that could come up during fall veto session. So, I would encourage people to stay with thecentersquare.com, and we'll be updating on these stories and more.
Greg, we just have a few moments left. So I do want to get your insight very briefly, however, into one of the first controversies surrounding the cashless bail provision of the Safety Act. You had a Madison County man who was charged with shooting and killing his girlfriend. Under the cashless bail provision, he was released. The state's attorney's office petitioned to keep him behind bars. The judge denied that. There's some outrage going on here. Just briefly tell us about it.
Yeah, and this individual, Michael Perham, actually was charged before the Safety Act was enacted, because September 18th is when it ultimately the Supreme Court said no more cash bail across the state. But the prosecutors wanted to implement the Safety Act policies on this individual who's charged with murder. And the judge looked at it and denied the local prosecutor's petition to hold Perham. And in particular, you've got Perham's defense saying it was all in self-defense. But clearly this is something that Republicans look at as an indication of what they say is a broken policy of the Pretrial Fairness Act. Now, I think that there's going to be a lot more to have said about what is happening with the Pretrial Fairness Act. But clearly we'll definitely be following up on those stories and more.
Well, thank you, as always, Greg, for keeping our listeners up to date on these very important stories. As you mentioned, readers can continue to follow updates and new news stories at thecentersquare.com. But we are out of time. For Greg Bishop, I am Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.